The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kilauea volcano update. Today, Thursday, November 18th, 2021. The volcano is still erupting. You guys are getting a view of a USGS video here looking right into the pit of the cone or the west vent. It's still bubbling away. There have been some changes this week. They've been overall minor. The volcano is still going essentially, but the changes were hard to miss because the main thing was that there were 2 new outlets from the base of the west vent that we'll talk about. Put that in the context of the changing output of the volcano, considering that the whole thing almost crusted over last week. Talk about that. The lava is still going underneath the crust, and it's flooding out onto that lowest edge of the inner crater, that lowest downdrop block to the north. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And everything is lifting up the west vent and that hardened crust and all that. So all that, as well as go through the monitoring signals. Talk about everyone's questions. Dan will be collecting questions in the chat and answering what he can there, and collecting what he can for us to discuss as we go along. And let him know also if you have any issues with our audio or video. So he'll be mine as well. Hello, Dane. So yeah, we'll cover the monitoring signals, and really just on Mauna Loa real quick. There hasn't been a whole lot of change. We may be going to Mauna Loa on a more of a monthly basis kind of thing. So always mention there's not anything worth changing. And as a couple of teasers, I did see some comments, people tagging me, and some discussions of there's a photo the USGS posted of steam in the lower east rift zone. So we'll talk about that. Nothing to be alarmed about there. There's been no change as far as lava going towards east rift. That's the cut and dry of what you need to know, right? So, okay, let's show you guys where this video is taken from here. Zoom it out a little bit so you can see that full extent of it. And what you're seeing here is these bursts of spatter coming up, and they're saying that from the lake surface down here up to where they're landing, sometimes on the edge of this cone, is in the order of 6 to 9 meters, 20 to 30 feet there. November 9th close-up of that video. So pretty big scale. It's really zoomed in. It's hard to really tell when it's so far away. Action is happening now, really zoomed in. But if we back out a little bit and look at our current thermal camera that's happening right now, you guys see that that's zoomed into this part of the west vent right up here. And right now everything looks fairly normal on the most part, although I may reload this because what we're seeing is some essentially changes in pressure around the outlets of this whole eruption site here. And we've had this main vent where the lava is bubbling into now, and then it's pouring out through this entry point right in here, this bright spot in the lake right there. Right in there. But it's also stressed out and broken open parts, and we'll see the new vents opened up here and here. And at this current frame that I have loaded, which is about an hour and a half ago, almost 2 hours ago now, you can actually start to see that since those 2 vents have deactivated, we're starting to see some cracking happening right here in near real time on this edge. So maybe I'll reload this now and see if I can get a couple extra frames. But thing still looks kind of cracked, and maybe it'll pop open, maybe it won't. But zoom in here in the thermal for you guys. You can see this in the last 24 hours. This sequence of this thing starting to burst open here at the end. So that's our theme: is that the pressure changes and it's variable, and overall not a whole lot of change. A lot of it's still pouring into the crater. It's not escaping anywhere where it can get to people or communicate like that. It's all just a novelty of how it actually changes and the dynamics and all of that. So what we're seeing in a lot of these cases is that this inner hardened crust seems to perhaps be a little bit thicker, and this outer margin where the lava has been oozing up and filling this trench seems to be where it continues to keep oozing up and popping up in that same zone, right? So for whatever reason, whether it's just easier to go along that boundary or there's some difference in thickness, it's hard to actually tell. But we can talk about some of the thicknesses that were measured in Kīlauea as it was cooling as well a little bit. Give us some estimate of how thick this crust might actually be. That's just the latest of how it actually looks. Compared to last week, you might notice we don't have these arms that poke off to the south or to the north over here. These things have been receding for a while, but they've been receding even more. You can see in this image right here from the last 24 hours. It seems like we've actually flooded this larger area, but now we've retreated back to have our levee perched pond. That's our just quick peek as we start our broadcast today. We'll come back around as we end. We'll look back at this again, probably in about an hour or so, and see what the latest frames show. As you clearly can see, this thing's bulging upwards, and it wouldn't be surprising to see lava leak out of here and start flooding this zone back through here in short order. But for now, we'll move on and talk about the first interesting aspect, which are these new vents that occurred earlier in the week. So the pressure was great then also, and so here you can see once again the top of this cone, and the lava lakes is at a high level within there, and it's bubbling and spattering and landing and building this thing up slightly, much more slowly than before when it was high fountaining. Still building it up a little bit through spatter, but mostly it's going down through the middle of this thing and shooting out the bottom into the lake. See the entry point a little bit right in there. But what's new in this photograph is hard to notice at first unless I point it out. It's back over here to the right. And by the time this photograph was taken, you look more like a little trickle, but we'll show you guys the other views of what this actually looks like to show you a little bit better scale of what was going on there. So there's the one side. And looking first at the thermal imagery that Dane compiled after collection by himself and Bob Martin. Mahalo, you guys. Here's the first frame that came in at 5:30 p.m., 5:38 p.m. on the 13th of November. You can see here a really bright glow of when burst of lava comes through, and it bursts out of the vent. It spills over a little bit to the side, and what you're going to see next, it's going to crack open on the sides here and here. Play this for you guys. It happens pretty quick, so I think I might have to let a loop here, but you can see there is those two channels, one on one side, one on the other. Doesn't want to start it over. We have that entry point, single entry point. We see overflows from the lava lake as it actually fills over and breaks the levees, right? And that's when the flow is coming. I have to stop this. I can't talk as fast as that thing is going. But the earlier part right in here, the flow is coming from the center of the lake towards the edges right there. That's the direction of flow, and the overflow of breaking the levee. And then what you see afterwards is you see a little bit of leaking out already earlier here on the 13th. Lava starts leaking out, or maybe it's overturning of a ponded surface. It's hard to tell exactly. A little bit of a blind spot back there. But when you see back here, these are two sources that are actually coming out from these sides and flowing around into the lake side. And lower here, see where I'm pointing. And it's interesting as well, before this happens, I rewind it a little bit more. While these overflows are going on, the top of this cone is actually closed in quite a bit. We saw that in that earlier image. We just some other images, but pressure was low enough that we actually had this crusting over. And what we also noticed was the extent of how far this bright spot shot into the lake also gave us some idea of the strength of the output. So it goes from not as much, more, to less, to out both sides, and in the whole sequence, I want to just go through it kind of quickly. You can see that the whole, all the dark purple spots are all lifting up, right? So this whole cone is being lifted from below by the rising lava, as is this piece of the island over here, as is this piece over here. Hard to tell from this view, but the only thing is this rim down here in the bottom right that's on the foreground outside of that crater floor, and everything else there is. Let's look at this at a different time scale here, put it in proper perspective, and first we'll just show you guys this other photograph from the USGS, zoomed in a little further, and you can see that exit point down here leading back to the lava lake. And they actually note here the direction of flow can be indicated by these pieces of rafting crust. That's true, but if you didn't have a video and only had these ropey textures, you could tell from the ropey curvature this is the. So interesting. At first, earlier on, overflow going this way, then a breakout that came back over and ran everything back over going the other way, which is confusing. Okay. All right, so here's a full context, and there's our bright spot going into the lake, and this is going back now to 2 weeks ago. So you can see the larger extent, start over here. You're getting the larger extent of lava on the edges, top and the left. Then we have that slowdown near crusting over, resumes back to its previous extent, mostly with this slightly closed in a little bit. Then it breaks open those 2 points in the bottom, and then by now they're all the way crusted over, as you can see in here. Have resumption of this steadier. So it's almost like there was some kind of something obstructing or slowing or constricting the flow of lava out, right? And so it went through all these various little adjustments, crusting over, pushing its way back out, cracking open the base of the vent where it had to, right? So since this vent is floating up and down, it's not that much work to push out the bottom of it, interface with the lava surface. Maybe I'll once again drag this one back and forth so it's more obvious here how much everything is rising and falling over this just last 2 week period here. So very current, you can see very clear rising of the cone. Makes sense then that the lava coming out of the cone is only spattering out of it more occasionally rather than fountaining out of it like first few weeks of the eruption. So there's a interesting other things to note here as well. I mean, we've lost most of our little islets and little islands that we had before somehow through that crusting process, right? Here's the earlier sequence. We have lots of these little islets floating around, and are part of this cooler zone, and they move around after, even as the lava crusts over there. You see them moving around, but eventually they seem to be somehow reconfigured below the lava surface. There's only one small one you can see. It bobs under right there at the end as well. So interesting to note that like the bottom of that lake is also deforming as lava is going underneath it and adjusting everything above it there. Really fascinating stuff going on in there. That's one of the aspects that we're talking about here. And here's a 24-hour GIF from the S1 camera. Just showing those first 24 hours when it burst open, so you can see the reverse angle. Can't the other side look down. It's hard to see the back side of the cone and what's really going on there. Although as this cone is rising into sight, it's getting better and better view. But here you can clearly see this outlet point on the southern side, that west vent cone on the base event. There's another one you can't see as easily. That's on the back side over here. That's wrapping its way around like that. When it first comes out, it puts out a big flow off in this direction, and then it builds its way back over this way. Whereas one on this side seems to have come out, looped its way in, and just gradually zips up. So it becomes a shorter and shorter exit point. Let's go on. So this might have lasted 2 to 3 days or so before it closed all the way up. And just to show that pattern from the side here. Okay, here's the map. The most recent map is from last week. But I just wanted to show this extent of the mapped area as this dark red right in here, right in the middle, compared to the larger pinkish color there, right? So that's 17 acres out of the 155. That's 11% of the area of the crater floor is actually active at this point in time. 11%. So not a whole lot. It's certainly been retreating, contracting, shrinking, however you think of it. And these guys having some sound issues, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm not exactly seeing it in playback myself yet.
Okay. Well, I'll keep going there. Let's see here. So yeah, 11% of the area is covered, and that is just that little red right in there. So we'll move on to look at these series of thermal maps that have been put out by the USGS from a couple of days before that previous map was when a flight actually occurred here, where they've compiled them and put them onto all the imagery and done all the calculations. So here it is in satellite imagery view. In this case, the yellowers yellow and the reds. The reds are just the actual vents. Are really hard to see in the scale, but we'll zoom in. Not to worry. But the actual whitish, yellowish area here is the active lava surface, and the blue is the cooled area with lava underneath it still. And it's within that innermost crater, which is about that big. And the next size crater is about that big. That's that large down drop block to the east. And then that's all within the caldera. So all through here is itself down drop block covered in lava, or a series of them. That's the larger one in there, right? So we're still in that innermost one. And we're starting to work our transition zone between this one and this upper floor here. There's kind of transition zone right through here that the lava is starting to work its way into. Right in there. So we zoom it in. Here's our west vent, just a single opening at the top, an entry point, and you can see that area of flow is fairly limited here by November 9th. More than a month into eruption. We have the island, central island from the previous eruptions, cinder and water pond interaction still visible, floating above everything else. Still, it's kind of frozen along with the rest of the hardened crust, and it's frozen sitting above it, so it's central island now. We have this new island that emerged from the west cone previous eruption for 2020. And it's bobbed up and got coated in lava and grown and formed and as well, and that's pointed out here as well. That's a zoomed in view, and we have a nice sequence here, right? So we're just zoomed into this bottom right panel right in here, but we can actually go back to October 15th and see the southern arm and the northern arm that we just discussed. We're back to October 8th. See that we had still recently had overflows happening onto these margins of the eastern part of the hardened crust, right through there. We're back to the beginning of the eruption when the entire surface was all molten. And we had not just the west vent, but also a series of southern vents and central vents were all visible.
Hey Phil, can you go ahead and move your microphone just a little bit closer to your mouth? I think the noise gate or something is just catching it a little bit.
Okay, maybe. Right, let's see if that makes a difference. All right, so there's the thermals. The thermals released by the USGS. On to show you guys what that looks like in thermal time lapse view here. So this is our most recent image. You can see here that's the active surface. That's just at 11%. It's just right through there. Grid cone and all that. So because we're looking from the west and we're on a closer side, we do get a pretty good view of this. It looks like it's maybe a quarter of the actual image of the surface area I can see on this camera, but it's really just 11%. There's a lot of it's distorted, and there's a lot of area back here that's compressed in the view. So let's play this from the beginning so you can see the whole sequence. And it starts off with the whole crater flooded. You see the central island, the west vent island. You see the southern branch, northern branch. You see a couple of pulses of lava coming in and flooding that backside. You see this circulation and overflowing of this active area into the rim. And you also see these ooze-up flows starting to come in along the back margin as lava continues to go underneath this hardened crust and up on the backside and squeeze it up, right? And that's these ooze-up flows that are pretty interesting there, right? There's interesting. I go back to, well, maybe zoom into this area right in here. You see, there's another one of these interesting cracks that's connecting that ring boundary along the crater wall with that innermost ring, slightly inside ring from that levee or that trench that was formed before. Like it's getting pushed out and it's just breaking at the seams, right? It just almost looks like a stitch getting pushed out right there. That's a similar thing that we're now looking at, and we'll check in again on that's happening down here next. So the same story. It's from this back side over here, and you can see it a little bit in this image. There's a slightly lighter colored protrusion right through here. These are the areas where the lava is starting to flow over from this inner crater that's deeper onto this ledge right through there. So it's going out and fanning out. And it's barely visible on here, but you can see there's still activity happening in that area right through there. So turn to the USGS thermal image that's been released of this. And this is taken on the 16th. And we're at a reverse angle now, right? So we're looking back from that direction. So our west vent cone is now at the top of the image over here. This view from the east gives us a different perspective. You can see maybe closer to 11% of the surface without active lava, and then all of this is a solid lake surface. And you can clearly see the warm ooze-out zone along the perimeter of the lake all through here, all the way around. And over here on the bottom right is that small flow that's essentially coming up from that ooze-up zone, but it's now able to flow out and cover this piece of land a little bit, and it's going to kind of grow in size as it covers itself more and more and more, and eventually this will become a little bay, I think, right, of this pond, and it'll be like a beach area, like a shoreline where lapping on, and as tide rises, so to speak, it'll flood it more and more, and then see it come up this way. You see it creep up into areas back in here as well. This is the first little inkling of it that we get to see here. It's a small flow. So from the thermal, we'll turn to the visible imagery here from the helicopter. It's a similar kind of view. There is that little knob, right now just a flow, but it's going to likely to become that little bay of the lava lake here on that northeast edge. And we have this zoomed in picture of it as well. So get to it. Show you guys more detail here. There's that higher up edge. You see lots of cracks all through there. You see some discoloration, like gas is coming out of there. You see some of these vents. Down drop block area nearby as well, and they're getting covered up, and it just moves the gas to the next area of the crack that's open still. You see lava looks like it's going into some of these cracks, areas like that. Lava flowing to that crack right there. So it's all kinds of little macro topography all through here, and all this stuff is places it was very hard to access, and going to get all covered in lava here before really anything else comes up. Interesting, and this is from a couple days ago. And it's coming in bursts. You can imagine that as lava is filling underneath this crust, it'll build up enough pressure, and suddenly this thing will crack open, and it'll just flood out in a big kind of burst. So here's one animation back from the 11th when the first of these seemed to occur. Another 24-hour animation there. You're picking up where we left off last week with that. Already had a few of these little flows starting to leak onto the edge a little bit. See, it really bursts on there. And here's a capture from the 15th. You can see another big area. And in these nighttime images, they really get blown out, but you do see some of the shape of the flow extent there. And in the most recent 24-hour animation on camera right now. So I can load it so you can see some of this, but it's not flowing as much right now, and you really see the remains of last night's flow with little spots of glow in the cracks of the surface of the lava flow. Depending on the light, I find it's a little bit hard to see as well. It's hard to tell what's fresh flow down here. This is not fresh flow. It can be a little hard to tell depending on the light on this camera when you're zooming this in especially. But the brightness is coming from further up here. Ooze up flow still continuing. You can see it's still ongoing. It just kind of moves around the perimeter from one side to the other as that whole cap wiggles its way up, and wherever it comes loose is where the lava flows ooze up. Right, and so zooming into the vent from the B1 camera, looking across the lava lake and not at that closer edge anymore here, you can get a pretty good view, an interesting view of the west vent. And this is not unlike what you see not too dissimilar. It's a little different. We get a view between this one and an S1 camera from the public overlook in a national park. But it does give you some idea. The national park, you kind of can see something like this much of it, of the actual lake itself. But I wanted to play this compilation that Dane made here. You can see the circulation across the pond with that smaller 11% perspective, perhaps. And you see the circulation, daytime images, and there's a west vent, and you know it's at that speed it's hard to tell as much. But so I'm going to drag it a little quicker here, so you can really see the filling that's been happening. Watch that back wall behind the vent there. Maybe I can zoom in even. Really been coming up pretty dramatically. I feel like see these really amazing time lapses of the Earth changing here on our day-to-day basis. One view of that lake filling, and then here to go back to the beginning of the eruption from the B1 camera, where we're zoomed into this backside back through here where the vent occurs. And earlier the ledge is back in here, so you can watch the ledge as this thing fills and eventually spills over, or this thing rises in the back there. But there's that whole sequence from the B1 camera daytime. See most of the action with the lava lake was all the way liquid all the way across this whole surface was early on, and most of it's zoomed into that back where we just saw it right in there. So I put it back and forth so you can see the actual rising and falling the lava lake surface over the past month and a half or so. So it's been coming up. It's come up so far 60 meters. That's 197 feet underneath this backside. And the whole thing is tilted, so this higher on this end and downhill going this way. And so we earlier had estimated that this embayment here was somewhere around an 800 meter elevation. And they're saying back over here we're getting closer to 804 or so. So that might be the range of it. You might have 4 to 7 or 8 meters is the range we've seen before reported as far as the difference in elevation from one side to the other. 20, 30 feet or so across the 155 acres of big area to accommodate that long 30-foot tilt there. Okay, so as far as the filling, here's our most recent filling graph, and I saw Nathan was asking about this earlier. Nathan, I don't know if you guys sorted that out, but here is the plot, and it's hard to see what's going on because we have an interesting signal that came in right in here, and that happened to be a very rainy day, so it poured a bunch of rain, a whole bunch of steam came up, and the steam was right in front of the laser, so I would guess the laser is probably at an elevation somewhere right there. And maybe that's just how high the steam came in front of it, and it could have been higher. And then it came back down once the steam blew out of the way, and it resumed its regular trend. So unfortunately, that blew out our scale. We'd like to have the scale just be like that much, but instead we get all this extra because of that steam signal right through there. So we get the longer term pattern here for over the last week. You can see gradually rising, a little jump, rising, slight little steps, coming up, and there it is on the 18th today here. That's the last week, and here's the last month, and pretty similar. You can see this. It's maybe a little faster than it was previously right here, but not as fast as before that. Right, so some slight variations in the filling rate, despite the geometry of it. Right, so that'll be interesting to see too. And of course, now that we have that spillover zone to the north, you can expect this slowdown to continue because there's a larger area to cover to put out all the lava, right? So that helps it not get as thick. Okay, that's the first couple of things there. And looking at the signals of the magma coming into the volcano here, we had first look at the GPS, a longer term pattern here. Over the past year at Kilauea Summit, there have been some small variations. It looked like it was, extending, and recently in the last couple of days, it looks like it's contracting slightly, but these are very, very small variations. The overall trend has been generally one of slight extension after that first phase of the eruption, which began here. That's interesting. You can see we can scroll back to not quite a year ago, and we had during that eruption actual faster increase in the extension rate than we're having now. Now that we have a second eruption, perhaps it's less surprising, but it's not following as steep a pattern today as it was last time, is all we can say right now. It's still coming in. You can see magma is still coming in. It's coming in still more than it can get out. That's why it's extending, essentially, is what we expect there. As the take-home message from this plot that's measuring the distance across the caldera. Looking at the tilt over the past month here, this says summit and rift zone, but it's just a summit, just the blue line, just a summit. And you can see that in the last few days, we've been going slightly down. We had a bump here earlier, and this bump corresponds to the time when we had those new vents opening up, not exactly at the, maybe slightly afterwards right in here. But we see this pressure pulse come through, and shortly afterwards we see at the surface the vents break open right in there, more or less. And this follows a few days after this signal, which was that first a slight surge that came through, and then almost like a blockage, the almost whole crusting of the lava lake surface before it came back up and resumed its pattern here. So it almost looks like one of those gas pistoning signals in some ways. Interesting things going on there, but you see our baseline is pretty much staying, right? We're having whatever is getting in the way and getting out of the way and adjusting in some ways, and that one as well. Even when our leading surface changes, overall the pattern has been now going down faster, right? And that's different from earlier in a month where it was maybe building towards that, right? You might say, okay, well, not as much lava is getting out as it wants to. Maybe that's why it's inflating slightly. Important to look at the scale as always. We're looking at less than 5 microradians top to bottom. So these are pretty small signals still, nothing major. But the trend of it, net gain underground, and then adjustments happening, and then now perhaps slightly a net loss. And this might turn around in a day or less. We'll wait for the longer term pattern before making any conclusion. But that's the past month, the tilt. Here's a past month in the gas. We haven't had a measurement reported, unfortunately, since the 9th back over here, but that one followed our crusting over event, which was down here at the lowest one we've seen thus far, essentially background levels. And we presume that we're still in this range, of 4,000 to 1,500, somewhere in there, as the quote-unquote normal, although I haven't seen any data reported or pop up on the graph here. But the gas is still coming out. We have had shifting winds on Hawaii Island in the last few days. So no matter where you are on island, you may have smelled some fog or had some effect of that. If it was possible to notice that between possible thunderstorms, depending on the effect, right? In any case, I won't show all the monitors today, but there's monitors showing fog, all along the Kona side as usual, and south side. And if you were to look at the history, you see more of that on the east side as well. There are fog and particulates still back here. As far as earthquakes, this is the last month. The scale is pretty small. 70 earthquakes per day might seem like a lot for some people, but that's essentially our background level for right now. When we were looking at the events leading up to this, we're up to over 1,000 earthquakes in one day. So this is really just minor changes within that background level. It might look like slightly more, but it's just all within this background level here. So maybe there's slightly more corresponding to this variations of outlets that we're seeing. But if so, it's very marginally so, not very much. Here's a map for the past week. You're really not a whole lot to see. No pattern at the summit, nothing in the rift zone. You do see the south flank cluster as usual. You do see the Pahala deep cluster as usual. Those are actually background for us at this point as well. Long-term patterns that we haven't seen change in a while. And importantly, in the Middle East rift over here, besides no earthquakes, we're also seeing the GPS still contracting, coming together across the rift zone, right? Which is a natural response following that big earthquake we had in 2018 at 6.9. An eruption that followed, of course, that was associated with it, and covering on and on and on and on. So today I wanted to add a little extra that we've talked about before a little bit, but not enough. Let me get this down so we can. This is an old paper from 1990 by Delaney and others. This is when we were first describing the idea of the deep rift and putting out evidence of how it might actually work, right? So without going into that whole tangent of the deep rift and all that, right, we certainly can discuss it in questions and more detail as we have in the past. But the point I wanted to pull out here is that following the 75 earthquake, which was a 7.2 initially, sometimes measured 7.5, sometimes 7.7, so somewhere in that range, a little bit bigger than our 6.9. But following that earthquake, there were measurements done periodically across that lower east rift zone. So there are two different kinds of measurements done. You can see the triangles here. Let me blow in on this map. Right, there's a few lines. This triangle is one from Kīlauea that goes down to, this is Heiheahulu, and down to Kulama, of course, like down by Kalapana. Right, that's something we're measuring with lasers, the distance, horizontal distance across that. There's also one that went from somewhere around HPP to Leilani. Another line right there. Another line from Kapoho along the coast. It looks like it's shot out across the water onto Kilauea Point. Well, we have a few different measures of horizontal distance from high points on the ground surface that are visible to each other on clear days. And then also you see these dark lines. This line I'm drawing over these dark dots. That's marking essentially the highway that goes from Kīlauea to Pahoa and then down to Lapana right there, the mid-year path, right? And so this is something where they've actually done leveling surveys periodically as well, and there we can get a measure of the up and down settling of the ground, a subsidence of the ground as it occurred over that time, right? So this is where we're talking about, and so very relevant, right? When we talk about today, what's been going on in adjustments post 2018, we talk about Highway 130 area and Alaili Drive right in there. So very relevant, same areas as we're discussing now, right? And earthquake happened in a similar place. Down, this is the earthquake area in this darker dotted pattern right through there. Okay, so let me scroll it over. I'm just going to show you two graphs that are partially from here, right? So the first thing to note here is on top, this is the distance with the lasers, like just the actual distance going back and forth. So 5 is the one furthest west by Heiheahulu over here. 5, and then 7, and then 8. We'll ignore 6 for now. Right, so moving from west to east. So 5 is the furthest up rift. Right, you see it was actually moving apart, extending before the earthquake, and it actually jumped quite a bit, opened quite a bit during the earthquake, over a meter. And then after that, it was still extending for at a rate of more or less 3 centimeters per year or so, right, by Heiheahulu. Right, so the ground is actually moving, and on the bottom here is time, so 1970. 75 earthquakes right through there, right? You might say, okay, well, what else is going on during this time frame? Well, 1983 was the beginning of the Pu'u'u eruption right through here. So we actually have continual lava being erupted out of the East Rift Zone for this whole interval right through here. And yet there's no change in its extensional part of the pattern across the lower East Rift. That's the fascinating thing there. And that's why you really have to have that deep rift pathway to drive this spreading and drive this long-term spreading, which eventually leads to surface subsidence, right? Because if I scroll down to this other graph here, this is along the highway And they did the first baseline in 1976, and then again in 79. So you can see initially in 79, that was a difference, right? This is 0 right here. The 0 difference across everywhere. And we're starting off by Kīlauea and ending by Kalapana over here to the bottom, right? So this is essentially crossing the rift zone from north to south like that, right? So if that's 0, you're seeing a little bit of subsidence over by Kīlauea eventually. But the closer you get towards Pahoa, you start going up and up and up. But actually, when you come to the rift zone, you actually drop down. There's a big subsidence trench that's forming right through there, right? And it gets bigger over time. That's to 86. That's to 88. And that's to 89 all the way down here. So what you're seeing is there's during times, even when lava is going to Pu'o'o, and you know that there is not a shallow rift zone pathway of lava is not going to erupt out of Leilani, during this Pu'o'o era. Still able to, just as part of the background process, how the volcano moves and grows, and especially after a big earthquake like in 75, like we had in 2018, is gonna drive that south flank. So in Leilani, it was 1.5 centimeters per year, plus or minus 0.3. I worked it out. That's about 1/2 to 3/4 an inch per year of opening, right? So in 3 years, you could have 1.5 inches. You could have over 2 inches of opening just from that regular movement down in there, right? And of course, going towards Kapoho, it gets smaller and smaller. All the patterns there, right? And so I go into all this detail because we've brought up before, like what's going on in Ala'ili, what's happening in Leilani. Why would the ground keep moving if the lava's no longer erupting and there's no pathway of lava? And this kind of cuts at that whole debate there. And I thought it was important to bring this up because, as I mentioned at the start of our broadcast, we have had people tagging us asking about this particular photograph posted by the USGS of Heiheahulu, Kilauea Middle East Rift Zone steaming. It's titled. And in a description, they say, during helicopter overflight on November 16th, 2021, HVO scientists monitored a thermal steaming area near Heiheahulu on Kilauea's Middle East Rift Zone. The expanse of this thermal area has not changed or expanded significantly since the previous overflight of the area in March 2021. So it has not changed or expanded. That's the important part. This view from the north looking south shows 2 dark areas where vegetation has died due to the steam. The steaming area is on the north side of older, 200 to 400 years old, vegetated spatter cones, right? So spatter cones is telling us that there are cracks in the area nearby. And you can see next to them is where the area of steam is coming up. And you see some dead uluhe ferns, it looks like. And it's pretty localized, what I can tell here. So just to show that steaming is still going on. They are still flying down there. They're still monitoring. I would love to see them update their SO2 reading, even if this to say that it was 0 sometime other than January earlier this year. But that's ongoing. What you got, Dane?
Those look like fairly deep features, yeah. Like there's crack in them.
Yeah, I think there's.
You can kind of see it twist around too.
Yeah, I was going to back in here. Where did it go? Yeah. One spot. Kind of. Yeah, right there. It looks like you see vegetation growing out of the wall of like a cliff.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like to me. So yeah,
big.
It's
cracks.
not like it's the movement around a big crack, or a little bit of change inside that big crack. That's the talk. It's interesting though, and we've seen though the steam moving. Post 2018 eruption up Malka of Highway 130. The Ala'ili area, but when you talk to the residents, they were telling us like about how the steam off in the distance would move back then. I don't know if you remember that when we were out doing that. Mm-hmm. So this is about that area, roughly. A little bit more upslope, but generally speaking.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's great to see that. On my monitor, Dane, it appears like your image is frozen. Or if you can turn your video off and on for me. Yes, thank you. Right. that's the changes on the rift zone, and while we're down there, we'll roll right into Dane's compilation of Pohiki here, where he has documented the changes on the beach as it appears today compared to how it was before. You want to take it, Dane, and narrate this, or you have me to talk about it?
Sure. And we can both talk about it, but yeah, as we play it, it's not that long. It's only 47 seconds, but yeah, just went down there again, heard about how the sand had been changing, and wanted to get the drone up because the drone keeps it pretty consistent in terms of measurements and all that kind of stuff. It's not exact, but we can see basically that beach is still there. And talking with the lifeguards, the guys that are down there every day, they don't really see that much changes anymore. Just small kind changes, oscillations depending on the different swells that are coming in and the direction of them. But here we see 2020 versus 2021 with a couple of extra months in there, and there's really you'd be hard pressed to be in there and find that much of a significant change, right? To just looking at it from the air with nothing but the naked eye, I mean, it's still the same.
Yeah, even some of those berms look like they're the same, like like there haven't been any big storms or anything even that have come through.
Yeah, they said it's been quiet for this season. When I was talking to them, like no big storms coming in. And the interesting thing is I know when we were back down there a year ago, there was very little spots that it was with sand. Then after that, it went purely to rock beach. And more recently, the lifeguards saying the sand's coming back in the certain spot, especially during low tide. I was down there today, and sure enough, there was people down using that little sliver of beach that exists.
Interesting.
Joey asked about the coral rebound. No, Kapoho was special. Basically, it was very special, and since it's gone, there's not going to be a coral reef in our lifetime. Basically, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Oh, I'll leave it to some marine biologists
to
correct you. I don't know what species are there, or they're
yeah.
But while we're looking and talking Pohiki, Dane, for those who aren't aware, this is the old boat ramp on the image right here. That's now landlocked, and here's a part of the old breakwall that's buried in that sand. Right? Do you have any status update, real quick, on what's going on with that? Just who haven't heard about it in a while.
Yeah, so the plan with the boat ramp in general is to do a dredge through that sand and establish a little bit, not a retaining wall, but more like a retaining net of some kind in order to keep the sand at bay and basically punch out a channel through that sand wall. This is needed because the Pohiki boat ramp is the only boat ramp in all of Lower Puna, and there's not a ramp around from Hilo all the way to Punaluu. There's nothing in between them, which is a huge distance, which complicates things like emergency rescues or anything along those lines. Also, the Pohiki boat ramp was the third highest grossing boat ramp in the state prior to the eruption, and now it's basically zero.
Yeah,
it's been that way.
Yeah, for the fishermen, right? If you guys specifically clear the for fish catch,
yeah. Yeah, the fishing out there was amazing, and the sand, it didn't really come in. That's the interesting thing until after the eruption really ended. Like as the eruption was winding down at Fisher 8, that was when we were first starting to see little bits of sand start to collect around the Pohiki Bay. Then after that, the sand just kept coming in for what would you say, 6 to 8 months afterwards until it started to find a equilibrium and start to slow down in the growth.
Yeah, that was about right. Yeah. On the image here, you guys can see the darker area at the top of the image. That's the edge of the lava flow as close as it came to the boat ramp. And it was the actual sand that got it rather than the lava itself. And these pools are all thermally heated as well.
Yep.
Right, Dane? And they're still warm down there, and temperature is still hotter than before.
Yeah, I'll go back and review that since we haven't talked about it really on the live stream. So the Pohiki area is known for all the little hot springs that go along the eastern coast of the Lower Puna, and Pohiki has many of these little ones. The thing about it is there was only really prior to the eruption one hot pond, or warm pond rather, down at Pohiki that would get roughly body temperature, right? It stayed right around body temperature. Then after the eruption came in lower east rift zone, the temperatures stayed mostly consistent until about roughly 2 years afterwards, when the temperatures in these ponds started to rise. And they went from roughly body temperature to now 100, 103, 104. One of them today I measured was at 109 degrees Fahrenheit. So they got warmer, and they've stayed that they've gone from warm ponds to hot ponds now, and they've stayed as hot ponds. When I was down there today, it's basically the same thing, and they fluctuate with the tides too, right? So the tides can affect the temperature in the ponds, but yeah, these little vents of fresh water coming out that thermally heated.
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear that 109, because you imagine that if the tide's low enough, maybe you're getting very, very little seawater, and that's close to your pure input signal somewhere around there, right? And that's a long-term change as we expect, given the injection of magma in 2018 in an area upslope of there where the water comes from. So,
right, and the exact spot, at least in my experience, the exact spot where you find the water coming up out of the ground, it changes every time depending on the tide, really. You know, where exactly is that upwelling of water, and I'll go back to the same spot, you know, try and keep it consistent. I'll measure it one time, it'll be 105, go back the next time and it's like 95 or something in that spot. It's just the spots moved over a little bit and slightly somewhere else now.
Are people still going into that big pond and using it?
Yep, still using it. Yeah. Yep. Still questionable water quality in that one.
Yeah. Not something to engage in if you have any open wounds.
Open
as usual,
wounds,
as
yeah.
There's always been a story in warm ponds. Yeah.
We did have, related to the topic, we did have a research paper posted on Hawaii Tracker about the MRSA on the Puna coastline, and all of Hawaii for that matter. And the synopsis of that was there's MRSA all around this place and all the water around the Big Island. And some of us may have known that before, but getting staph infections down in the ocean. But yeah, that kind of just confirmed a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, make sure you heed the signs down there if you're not from the area. All right, so I think that's it for our first segment. So we can start saying some thank yous.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first want to thank everybody that tuned in today. Really does help the channel just being here and being engaged in the conversation. Likes, share, subscribe, all that stuff. It does help with the YouTube algorithm. We don't have big old marketing budget, so we rely on viewers like you to do a lot of that legwork and just get the algorithm working in our favor. We also post all of our content on hawaiitracker.com, and that is the place you can go to find our updates in chronological order. You can also sign up, become a member there, and submit your own little post or make your own profile. We do have a couple sponsors that we want to thank. First being Kilauea's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. Kilauea's is a fine dining establishment, and they also have a new location in Orchid Land. They have two separate menus, so you can visit both and get a different flavor each time. The indoor outdoor dining, takeout, COVID safe, all that. So this really is the place to go. They got live music on Sunday nights. I go there regularly. The good twists on some classical dishes. So definitely check out Kilauea's, and we thank them for their support. Our second sponsor is Kalani Tours, and they operate out of Kona. They do a variety of different tours, including waterfall and Kona Coffee Farm tour. But really the one that is going right now is kind of the lava tour, being able to see an eruption inside Halemaumau and get that firsthand experience from people that kind of know what's happening up there and are familiar with the area, and also do a more personalized tour instead of the big box tour where they cram everybody onto a giant bus. so you can get your questions answered, and it's a little more tailored to you. So definitely check out Kalani Tours and out of Kona when we thank them. We also do have support from the Hawaii Community Foundation through the Puna Strong Grant and from the County of Hawaii, and we appreciate them as well. All right. I think we can dive into some questions, huh?
Yeah.
We do have a $20 super chat from Brenda. No comment, and definitely appreciate that as well.
Oh, Brenda.
All right, I do not have that many questions here lined up. We did talk about the lava lake depth meter not changing from Nathan, but it's still working, right? It just had that one hiccup in the middle with the steam, you think, and then it's more or less just the lake isn't really rising that fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that little hiccup. The signals that we're seeing on monitoring streams are like they've resumed their background trend, their baseline trend from before that happened, right? So it seems like whatever it was, it did cause those short-term variations on the surface, but it went back to where it was before, essentially. So those were just short-term fluctuations, as I figure. The long-term pattern is that despite that, it is still filling underneath the crust and lifting everything up. So yeah, that's if I understood correctly.
Right. Nathan also wonders how big roughly is that cinder cone now on the western wall? Like, do we have its rough dimensions?
I haven't heard any updated number, Nathan. The last number we got was in the range of 20 to 25 meters, which is, I would say, okay, the upper end of that 25 meters is about 80 feet. So, but, every time I go down there, I see like another chunk of spatter land above it. And so even if it's like a couple inches and another couple inches, you're going to add a few feet there. So maybe you're up to 85 feet-ish ballpark. My best guess, Yeah.
I did answer this one in chat, but maybe you want to take a stab at it as well. Mark asks, is there any historical record of this? Is there anything in the historical record that this eruption is similar to? Curious how long this current eruption is going to last, or if we can predict any changes from that.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. We've gone over different patterns at different points in eruption that seem similar to the past ones, right? And right now, the best one to compare it to is the one that we just had in December 2020. And our last two streams, we compared a little bit of the eruption rate has spiked early and decreased at similar rates, both in December 2020 and in September 2021. The total volume is increasing at a very similar rates. We're slightly less this time, right? The number I just saw was 30 million cubic meters from the USGS, reported for earlier this week. So it might still be 15-20% less than the same point last year. So it's pretty close, but just slightly smaller, maybe. And
right.
The last one lasted 5 months. So my best guess is, it'll go on for 4 to 5 months.
Somewhere in that range.
Total, yeah, altogether, right? So, and if we've had a month and a half already, that gives it another 2 to 3, 4 months to go, somewhere in there. Presuming something else doesn't happen first, right? I mean,
right.
We always just wait and see, and pattern is perfectly predictable and understandable until something comes and breaks it up, and suddenly we just threw out the whole old book and we started a whole new story. That's often how it goes. Wait and see.
Well, yep, sounds good. That does do it for the questions right now. We will be doing another question and answer segment. If you have anything that didn't get answered, throw it in the chat and we'll make sure to get it at the end. So I'll pass it back to you, Philip, for the final segment.
All right, thanks, Dan. Yeah, it won't be as long as our first part here, but we do want to cover some of the photos, video released by the USGS here. So start off going back to, this is November 12th, last week, Friday, and looking in at prior to these other outlets opening up, right? When we actually had that closed in top, looks like a belly button almost here, right? Like a pico. Looks like the lava was able to spatter and close off that opening, which later fell back in. And as we started our video, the first thing today, we showed you guys that video of that bubbling area that was about right in there, about that size or so. And so in our earlier frame, there's nothing happening over here in the bottom right. We maybe see some discoloration, right? There's a little bit of discoloration, like there's gas outlet there, so we know that there's probably a crack that maybe the lava used afterwards come up through there. That original fissure that came up through the crater wall is underneath this whole area, so no surprise to see, some extension of that, right? For most of it's coming up the middle, but some came out the side and the other side as well. Main entry point, the lava lake right there. And then off to the side, you see this pattern of this that you see all over the place of this built up levee, and then the lava overtopping and spilling over the levee in a little channel right in there. That's what that looks like. And there is a telephoto view of the spatter coming through that smaller opening of the vent right there and building it from above. And we also have telephoto view of this overflow of the lake levee right in there. It was estimated to be 1 meter, about 3 feet high or so right there. That little, and that's something that has been out for a few days already. But just today, we have released the video that goes along with this 1 meter, 3.3 feet, November 12th levee that was right there. I have some wind sound. That's what it looks like. Big zoom lens taken from the west rim there. Yeah. So that's the last edition of video, and there's a few more pictures to go through here. This view of the western half of the summit caldera is looking at a little bit of the surroundings of the lava lake. So for those of you guys who are asking, where is the lava and where is it spilling over and all of that, right? So you can see here, this is that innermost crater. Actually, the innermost one is down here where the black edge actually is, and here's our little whale tail spillover zone right there, that lowest on the block. And then the next level of crater is this one right there. That's that edge of this lower edge of this bigger flat area right through there. Flat. And beyond that, you see the caldera. There's this flat area behind it, above it, all the way through there. The cliff way back up there, right? So those of you guys who are wondering if when we're talking about this thing spilling over, you're trying to be very careful with saying it's just lapping onto that innermost ledge. It's not anywhere spilling over the outside. It's not going to get out of here because it's just made it up past the very, very first cliff. Cliff number 1, right? And then there's a cliff number 2, and there's a cliff number 3, and there's a cliff number 4. So it's still way, way, way in there. And each one of those is a bigger and bigger area, which is harder and harder to fill. It takes a lot more area, more volume to fill that area. So that's the view here of those down drop crater blocks, right? You do see some interesting other features on here. Hard to tell exactly from this angle for me, but I believe that the 82 fissure is right there across the crater floor, right down in there. I think the 74 fissures maybe are down here, over here. And on this upper piece of land up here, you see the far end of the road where it drops off into the crater. Right? Parking lot would be off down over this way. Pieces of land down over here. So you can see all the big cracks that have come through the road. Maybe I can go through on this one to the original to blow it up a little bit more. A little bit blurry all the way. There's the end of the road. You can see some of these big cracks that in 2018 collapse have cut across the road. Looking on there, so find that big crack again. Cracks. There's some other interesting things here. You guys notice all these patterns of all these bumps over here. There's a little historical note, Dane. This is that area that's flat within the caldera that they've had that very first airport. They used to land planes and have an airstrip back in here. And then during the Second World War, they're trying to prevent an easy invasion, and so they put all these bumps to make it not landable anymore right over here, and it still survives out there in the desert.
Yep. They did all kinds of crazy stuff in the national park during World War II. I don't know. One thing I was reading the other day was that they actually were setting up to make it an internment facility right on the edge of Kilauea, like one of the internment camps. They did it, and then they found out that it was illegal and had to move everybody to Oahu, or the vast majority of the people that were kept there. But the FBI went around and rounded up, I think, 600 people from the island and put them up at KMC, turned it into a prison camp for a little while, at least for a couple weeks. That existed.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there was. I'm not sure if I've seen the digital record of it yet, but there was a volcano after dark in a park at one point that talked about the history of KMC and tournament, that stuff. That's a little known part of the history of the park. Definitely is acknowledged there.
I mean, it could be a whole episode just talking about all the crazy stuff that happened in 1942 at the national park between the superintendent Wingate and the General Green, I think it was. I can't remember his name right now. That was in charge of the military operations on the island. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, maybe someday we'll get to that, huh?
Yeah.
So there's that bulldozed area, and then over here to the side you can see the November '82 lava flow. I'll zoom it back out so you can get a better view here. There it is, bottom part of the image, right through here, right through there. And there's a continuation of that road, past all those big cracks. They're all cracked up. And back in here is where the road is actually closed, is right about in here. So go to the old overlook area at Kīlauea, which is right over here, this little triangle right there. We can go to the new overlook area, which is down right around in there. So actually, wait, it's right down in here. Down here, we get a slightly different. That's the perspective. Kīlauea crater back over here. Kilauea is back over here with Pu'upuai cinder cone. That throwing all the cinder down all to this area. So if you actually happen to walk out on a trail to lava viewing, you've walked over the cinders from 59 that fell out of that area. Right. Sometimes if you're not in a hurry, you can look at least here as well. So it's a little bit different perspective to check out today here, since it was offered to us. Volcano House Hotel is back over here, back rim. Evening Bluff, back over here. One view of it, and there is a view turned looking the other direction. So now here's the 82 flow once again, but now we're looking back towards the south. All these cracks in the distance are the Kīlauea fault zone. Right, that's thought to be an area of deep magma storage, deep rift similar style, all through there. And in the shallower parts, very rarely actually erupt and have intrusions like the shallow rift zones, but they do crack, and sometimes they have intrusions and eruptions. But what this is focusing in on is that there's actually a little gap down here at the south edge of the crater where this 82 flow is able to find this little gully and flow out through there and then come out and go out a little bit out of that innermost crater to the other edge to this further back over here. And then there it meets the 74 flows, 71 flows, 71 flow back in here. That could have gone even a little further all the way down to here. Those who are wondering if we were to fill that whole caldera, where would it actually go? This is a view of the direction it would go, and it would likely follow a similar kind of path where it spills out through here and then it starts going off that way across the desert towards the ocean eventually, and lots of these big cracks and lots of areas for it to go where it want to affect people as well. So that's the images here. Just a couple final things. One is Volcano Watch article today is celebrating 30 years of Volcano Watch, something that we have that we acknowledged a couple weeks ago already. So great to see this. This will be posted on hawaiitracker.com if it is not already. And since we talked about it already, we won't have to recap it.
Yep, it's up. I just put it up there.
Right. Awesome. So that's the Volcano Watch, and before we do our final, we'll start off with our final webcam checks here. Let's look at the V1 camera first here. And I'm just seeing a little bit of glow, no flows here on a down drop block, and the backside is too blown out to really tell anything over there. Let's move on to look at the KW camera. I reload this one as well. Looks like our full appearance, an extent lava lake right through there. You do see a little bit of these flashes in the last 24 hours of flows back here along the perimeter. And one flash at the very, very far tip of this overflow on a down drop block. This is that down drop block one more time, and that little whale tail bat. Move on to our thermal, and let's see if there's any lava that leaked out of that, if it just bulged up and didn't need to leak out anymore. So maybe a little bit, but there's not a whole lot leaking out in that cracked area, but I still see the cracks glowing, so interesting. Note if that area is weak and might be an area that has an ooze up. Might take a little longer than I thought. There it is once again, last 24 hours, and maybe starting to come out a little more on its bottom edge. Further up, you see this upper. One last peek into the S1 thermal camera. So this one, not quite clear what's going on. If this back entry point here is still active, or what's going on if it's coming in or out there. I can't really tell with this time interval. Might be some complication right through there, but otherwise it's looking pretty normal. On this other side, you only see one small glowing puka hole right through there. Looking more stable than it has at other points this week. Although these changes, once again, are all just minor changes, and the overall pattern is the same. The overall outlook is still the same. So one last thing here. I pulled this out from Professional Paper 537B. This goes back to 1966. This paper was released. So this is going back to the Kīlauea lava lake. And Kīlauea is unique in that it was actually drilled repeatedly through the cooling crust, measure the thickness of the crust as it was forming in those first few years, right? And actually for longer than that. So what I have here is from 1960 to 62, right? And we're looking at the depth in feet of how much the crust was growing, right? So they actually came back so 1960 is actually so December. But here is where the eruption actually ends. And this first section, it's growing 3.9 feet per month. Right, so after a few months, it's down to essentially 12 feet. So for 4 months, 16 feet. So right after that, it slows a little bit more to 1.8 feet per month, down to 1 foot per month or so. And you can see long term it got slower and slower and slower, right? So we didn't get the benefit of all that. We only had 4 months between the end of the December 2020 to May 2021 eruption and the beginning of the September 2021 eruption. So we might have got as far as something like this. 16 feet, perhaps, ballpark, of how much a crust would expect to form without the lava coming into it anymore. To slow or change the process there. What if we were to take that easternmost crust that originally crusted over on January 8th? Right? In that case, it's been twice that long, 8 months, maybe not quite 9, maybe 8 months. So if it's 8 months, then we might say, okay, well, by that point, December to or somewhere in here, we might be somewhere in the range of 24 feet. 24, 25, somewhere in that range, right? So, and that's of course not accounting for any of the islets having roots and all that other complication. We're just looking at fairly basic how would the crust be expected to thicken without this other changes laterally in topography. Thank you guys, Don Richter and Jim Moore. Going back a ways to pull that one out. And that is going to be it. And so just make sure that you check hawaiitracker.com for all those links. Volcano Watch, all the other time lapses. You can watch them on your own time over there. On the Facebook page, you can see people posting a lot of their images. Like I thought I'd feature one today by Harry Durgan here. I'm taken from that overlook and zoomed in here on the left. He points out he sees a warrior over here on the left side of this cone, poised to throw a spear, perhaps. I thought that was a cool one for you guys to maybe try to go find. See, there's that new outlet that was coming out, and this gives you a better idea of how much higher it was than the actual lake surface back through here. Yeah, popped out, it came around. One more reason to point out Gary's photograph here. So check that out and check everything, all the other images from our users on Facebook as well. And whatever you got, Dane.
Still muted. There we go. All right, we do have some questions that came through. I do want to start out by thanking the super chats that we had. Gary Bryan came through and said, "Great update. Thanks, guys." Thank you, Gary, for the continued support. Always, count on Gary. And then we had a $5 super chat from Bill, who asks, has USGS been monitoring the type of lava coming out of the current eruption? Have they seen any changes or trends, like in the composition or the silicate?
Yes. Let me pull up last week's Volcano Watch, which was tracking magma movement using olivine crystal clocks. We didn't get a full final answer, but we did get a picture right here, right? So we have images of olivine from Hawaiian volcanoes. And so what we're looking at is that they did report the December 2020 eruption had a rind of growth, right? That occurred in a shallower chamber around a core that grew in a deeper chamber, right? So they're saying, okay, that tells us there was an injection from below, and it stayed based on the diffusion of the magnesium across the glass here, that it essentially stayed in residence. Let me go back and look at the number here. Let's say it was 60 days. 60 days or less of diffusion times that are modeled from these olivine crystals. So essentially, the point being that we had an injection of we had an injection of magma from below that came up, brought up the cores, and then while it was sitting in a shallow chamber for less than 2 months, this rind grew, and then it erupted. So they pull us back to a series of earthquakes that occurred in October of 2020, preceding the eruption in December, and it is that being the beginning of the adjustment phase right through there. So that's what we know about December 2020. So to get to the question, for this eruption, all we have is one picture that says we have a high phosphorite core, high magnesium core, and a low magnesium rim, once again, similar to what we saw in December 2020. So the implication here, is just quickly, without having diffusion modeling or anything else, is that it looks very similar to what we just saw. So I would suspect, especially considering we had the intrusion in late August, right, a few weeks ahead of the eruption, that intrusion was likely the batch of magma that brought this stuff to the surface. Right, brought this core to the surface, then it sat there from August to September and likely grew this rim, and then it got thrown out of the volcano after that. That's the likely story, right? So We don't know exactly, but it seems likely that it's going to follow the pattern of the last one, or it's a fresh injection of magma from below that's causing this. And that's consistent with our GPS signals that are showing continued extension. There's magma still coming in from below despite it being erupting.
All right. Let's see what we got here. Do we have any more questions? Through them pretty quickly. Christy asks, curious to know if there's any elevation change in the large down drop area to the east with the current activity. So we're talking back inside the caldera. Like, is the blocks moving or anything like that?
No, the blocks aren't moving, but they are sloped. I'm not sure exactly what she means.
That's true. It could be that kind of elevation change.
So here's the image, right? I mean, you know, looking at this a little earlier, right? It's not easiest to tell because I mean, for the most part, this upper area it's not exactly flat, but let's call it flat enough, right up there, right? So you can see that the cliff is similar distance on both sides, but you know, there seems to be almost like there might be areas that sag a little more, like there, like it might sag. So there might be a little, you know, bays, so to speak, as well, if it does ever get up to that elevation up there, where it could start filling those areas first, right? But it's hard to tell exactly. I could maybe dig out one of those older topo maps that we generated ourselves from the DM data, but it's going to be real subtle, honestly, and you know, and it only matters when it comes down to looking at this kind of thing, like we're seeing down here. This where what shape is it going to actually be when it flows onto that block? Really, you know, a temporary curiosity, because you know, at some point all this is going to be all covered in black, all the way above. So I think that's the best discussion I can offer. That.
All right. Well, that I believe does it for questions. I'm not seeing any more. I appreciate all the super chats that came through. Those really do help. And if you want to consider making a monetary donation, we also take those on hawaiitracker.com. So with that, I think I can pass it back to you, and we will be back next week unless something happens.
Mahalo, Dane. Mahalo, you guys, all you guys for contributing. Even if it's just liking, sharing, subscribing, that helps us also, right? It helps us show our reach, so that we can also prove to our grant funders that their work is impact as well. So mahalo for that. And if you are able to donate monetarily, then extra as well. So yeah, things are changing. You know, the long-term prospect does, you know, still hasn't changed, but we're looking for more little details. You know, maybe we'll have some other little outbreaks. You know, the oozing. We'll have some with that kind of stuff going on. Yeah. Good point, Marin. Next week Thursday is Thanksgiving Day, so probably not the best day for us to be doing. Maybe we can bump it to Wednesday, perhaps.
Yeah, Wednesday or Friday. Wednesday works for me.
Yeah, so maybe tentatively Wednesday. Keep your eye on our feed. We'll post an announcement when we finalize it, but I think probably Wednesday might be better. And yeah, unless something happens between now and then, and it's just these minor changes, we'll see you guys on Wednesday.
All right.
Yeah.
Lunar eclipse.
Forest notice. Yeah, lunar eclipse coming up. It's only in a few hours. It's going to be overhead. I ran into Janice Way this morning, park photographer. She's over at the overlook this morning, taking photographs of the moon set. So I will have to look for that and share that as well when I see something for her. I also filmed some there a little bit, and I will put out videos of that as soon as I get my video editor back together. I had some technical challenges to overcome this past week. A little delayed on those, but those are still coming. Those spans. So yeah, go if you have a chance, go check out the eclipse, and if you have a chance, check out the volcano, and if you have a chance, check out both. Until next week, from HawaiiTracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.